Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am your host, Alan Moore, and today it is my pleasure to have back on the show Jake Kuebler, the owner of Bluestem Financial Advisors, a fee-only financial planning firm in Champaign, Illinois, which is where the University of Illinois is located. We actually had Jake on the show last August in episode 7 to talk about his career and what all he was working on. So you can go to xyplanningnetwork.com/7 to catch up to speed, since this interview definitely built on top of the previous one. I wanted to have Jake back on because he recently completed the purchase of the firm from his business partner, Karen, as she has officially retired, leaving Jake a 30-year-old planner at the helm of a very, very successful fee-only practice. I dug into some of the details on how the succession plan has worked, Karen's transition and the transition of the clients, along with some of the issues Jake had when a lead planner left in the middle of all of this. We then spent some time talking about retainer billing and how his firm structures their values-based billing, which includes a net worth and income-based calculation. Jake talked about how they actually changed their billing model, which literally doubled the fees of some clients, and how they were able to retain all but one through that process, which is crazy to me, but no big deal for Bluestem. I love it. Finally, you'll hear us chat about the white paper that Jake recently co-authored on the history of retainer fee billing in financial planning, which should be an interesting read for any XYPN radio listeners. As always, you can find additional resources we mentioned during the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/66. In addition to the typical resources, you'll also find a link to our recently launched book co-authored by Kitsis and myself titled The Monthly Retainer Model: What It Is, Why It Works, and How to Implement It in Your Firm. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN radio listeners, where you can interact with other listeners, ask guest questions, and more. All right, without further ado, here is my interview with Jake. Hey, Jake, welcome back to the show, man.
Great to be here again, Alan.
I am excited. So for any of our listeners that have started from the beginning, you will remember that we had Jake Kuebler on back in August of 2015 in one of our first episodes, talking about his career. I believe is episode 7. I should have looked at my list. And now you're back on 56 episodes later. So I'm very excited to have gotten you back on the show because you have a couple of things that have been huge shifts. So I would say before we jump in, I suspect it would be helpful for any listener that doesn't remember Jake's story to go back and listen to that episode, just because it'll give you some context on a lot of the career path and kind of how Jake got to last year. And then, this episode will be kind of a recap of the last 12 months to hear how things are going. So does that sound good?
Absolutely. And it's certainly been great to kind of watch this podcast evolve. I am a half marathon runner, and in my recent training program, I've been certainly using your episodes to keep me going on those long weekend runs. So it's been great.
It's like being your workout buddy, but I don't have to go running, which for anyone that knows, I hate running. So that works out well. I feel like I'm training with you now.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're my running coach, Alan.
I love it. We have been honestly just surprised is an understatement. We've been kind of flabbergasted by the growth of the podcast, just because, like many things that we have done, we just kind of wonder, there must not be a podcast in this space because, no one wants to listen to a podcast. And so, I don't know, we launched it anyway, and we have just been absolutely surprised by watching the growth over time. I mean, we're over 140,000 total downloads or something like that, which just means way too many people have been listening to my voice drone on and on, which is why I'll get you talking now. So kind of as a recap, when we talked last August, you were in a position where, you've been a succession plan at a firm. You turned 30 this year, correct?
I did, yeah. April.
So you're now an old man.
I am.
You're what? Almost 3 decades younger than the average financial planner. So we can't say old yet.
At least they don't call me a kid anymore, I hope.
I still get kid sometimes, but I think with the beard, I'm now out of the kid mode. Now we just call it college kids, which I'm okay with.
Right.
So you were in the process that you owned 50% of your firm, and then at Bluestem there in Champaign, Illinois. And, kind of with this plan that Karen, your business partner, was going to retire. And I will tell you, I remember when you first started the succession planning process, I guess you had been at Bluestem for a year or two, and it was before it was even called Bluestem, when you and I first met. And I remember thinking like, yeah, this guy's got the golden ticket, which means it's going to fall apart. There's just no way this happens. This never works out. Like the older advisor never brings in the younger advisor and actually sells to them. And you were a shining example of why it's a good thing you did not listen to me or my thoughts, because it has worked out. So I guess just kind of catch us up on what has the last year looked like for you, just from a business ownership and buyout succession plan process. I don't know, like what's been going on and kind of how have things wrapped up at this point?
Has it only been a year? It seems like so much has happened since then. Yeah, it's been a pretty crazy whirlwind year. Actually, I think pretty shortly after we talked, one of the associates that we had working with us at the time came to the realization that it wasn't a good long-term fit and left shortly thereafter. So not only were we kind of mid-succession plan trying to finalize the rest of Karen's clients into a transition to a new advisor, but then we were sort of dealing with an internal transition on top of that. So right after he left, we had to kind of rethink how we were going to change over and move over clients. And things worked out very well. I have an associate, Josh Kuebler, who's a great advisor, and he really stepped up and was able to take on some clients. I took over a few more from Karen. So really the kind of the beginning of that was we got to rethink who these clients are going to be working with long term. And I think at that point, Karen was down to maybe 15 or so clients. So it wasn't that many left to transition. And all those clients had worked with either me or Josh in the past. So it wasn't a terribly painful transition, but just a kind of a last minute shuffle there. We also were in the midst of looking for a new office space. So we, in January, moved to a larger space, doubling our square footage, which gotten some very positive feedback from clients. So that was kind of the end of 2015 into early 2016. And then 2016 has always been kind of the plan for Karen as to when she would like to formally retire. So in 2015, I think she was just a little over half time. And then 2016, she did a pretty rapid transition from half time down to retirement. So I think kind of each month she was reducing her number of hours until the point at which around August she was at about 5 hours a week, which was pretty much just enough to stop in, say hi, catch up on anything she really needed to know. But, she was kind of fading off as opposed to just having a cutoff date. And then September 1st was officially her retirement date. Although we didn't sort of take her off the books altogether. She's going to be what we're calling advisor emeritus, which just means that she does want to hang around and do a few things, some volunteering with some professional organizations and some internal mentoring and maybe some pro bono client projects from time to time. It's sort of funny that, it's only been a couple weeks now that she officially retired, but because it's been such a gradual transition over a long period of time, it really doesn't feel like anything's changed too much. I don't know if it just hasn't sunk in yet or if we just kind of handled it in such a gradual manner that there was never a day where you walk in and, notice an absent or anything. So yeah, that's been a big change. And we had a going away party for her with all of our clients at the end of August. And that was a great time to kind of reflect back on her career and everything that she has done. And our business coach also had us use that as an opportunity for Karen to remind people of this great partnership that we had built and, tell not only existing clients but past clients that she felt like she was leaving the firm in great hands and still thinks that we're the best choice. And that was a really smart move because we ended up having people come up to me at the retirement party saying, hey, we haven't touched base in several years and, I think I need to come back and maybe we need to be looking at this long-term relationship that wasn't a good fit before for whatever reason.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, what a year, man. You made that sound like, just, a couple little things have happened.
Yeah. So it has been a lot, but it's all been good stuff. So it's hard to complain about being a good busy.
The beauty of being a business owner. I know, right? And that's I guess we'll dig into a few of the challenges just because I don't want it to seem like window dressing because it's been a hard road, whether, and it has turned out very well, but there's a lot of things that you just talked about that have happened. So I'm going to go back just a minute. So you had mentioned that you had the associate advisor that left. So what is your firm structure, I guess, in terms of advisors working with clients? And did it change with that advisor leaving?
Yeah, so we pretty much follow the Angie Herber's Diamond team, where under our current structure, you would call myself the senior advisor, who would be, so if you picture the diamond structure at the top point, senior advisor leads the advisory team. So that would be where I'm currently at, just because I'm the most senior advisor in the firm now. And then underneath me, you would have two lead advisors. So in theory, a lead advisor would be both leading some of their own relationships with the less complicated clients, as well as supporting the senior advisor on the more complicated relationships. And the goal was that we would have two associates at Karen's retirement that would be filling that lead advisor position. So that would have been Josh, who's currently with us, and then John, who was the associate that ended up moving on. We were planning on kind of backfilling that by hiring another person sometime in the next, year or so around Karen's retirement. And the associate really is just kind of a support advisor, maybe a recent graduate who comes in and supports the lead and senior advisor and just kind of the team overall.
So we would normally call that the paraplanner, I guess. So you're calling that support advisor, two lead advisors, and then the senior planner or relationship manager, as I've seen it called.
Right. So our goal had been that both Josh and John would have been leading relationships, and therefore they would have both had their own clients, as well as they would have been supporting me on my clients. And so with Karen's leaving, we had been sort of introducing John to clients and telling clients that he was going to be taking over. So we had to do a pretty sudden, shift and say, well, unfortunately, it doesn't look like John's going to be continuing on with us, and here's how we're going to be pivoting and insert either Josh or myself into the relationship to kind of take the lead. So for those clients who had been expecting to work with John, they had probably been working with John at least a year and a half by that point. So in order to, not make them feel like they were kind of in a lurch or being shifted around quickly, the clients that Karen had been working with that were supposed to transition to John, Karen continued to work with either myself or Josh, so that the clients had at least a couple more meetings over about a year time period to make that transition a little smoother. So I would have loved to have more time, but, can't plan for these things. And then we ended up, and then we just did another job search and ended up hiring back an intern that we had the year before, Emily Murphy. Was really in love with our firm, and we really liked her when she had graduated. Originally, we just didn't have room for her, quite honestly, and we're putting all of our time and attention on kind of the transition. So when John left, it just created that opportunity where Emily could come back. So that's where we're at today.
So do you have an associated or that support advisor role? Do you have anybody filling that role at your firm yet?
Yeah, that would be Emily. So right now, only myself and Josh actually really lead relationships, and then Emily supports us. So we've got kind of 3/4 of the diamond where it's myself, Josh, and Emily, but Emily's really more in we call it an associate advisor role because she is on every meeting. She does participate on some things in the meeting, but she doesn't actually lead any relationships herself yet.
Okay. So then eventually she moves up to lead advisor, you hire another support advisor. At what point do you, and I ask this rhetorically because I know you have a plan for this, but what is your plan for having a second diamond team? Like, is that the plan? I mean, do you want to have a second team, or is that too much? I mean, how do you go from one diamond to two diamonds, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that ultimately is the plan. I mean, my whole perspective on this business succession was I never wanted to be a sole owner. I always wanted to have that partnership because I think it's great to have people that you can work with that have other strengths, complementing skill sets, as well as just having some of that succession there in case something ever happens to me, or even just, I want to take a month off and travel or spend some time with my family or whatever it might be. So I think the point at which we have to start creating that second diamond is still a few years away, so I don't have to worry about it too much. But in my vision, and Angie Herber's actually in her white paper talks a little bit about this, eventually the way that it works is a lead advisor would break off and create a new diamond team, and then you would just hire some people to kind of backfill the missing spot on the original team, as well as hire someone to support this new team that you're creating.
Gotcha. And then just kind of client relationships that make sense to shift over. Will, at Abacus where I work, I'm trying to think how many diamond teams we have. We have a bunch of them, 7 or 8, I guess. And so creating a new one is easy, I guess, because we just either buy a firm that has a couple of advisors or just move a couple folks over from existing teams. Going from 1 to 2 seems like it'll be the challenging one going, and then every addition from there, I would suspect gets easier, but I could see, I guess you just don't go from 4 people to 8 people. I guess you just go from 4 to 5 to 6 as needed.
Right. Yeah, I certainly, sometimes I feel like the bigger you get, the easier staff transitions are, but the flip side of that is, of course, the bigger you get, the more complexity there is. So I guess there's pros and cons, but I've heard, and I can't now remember who to attribute this to, but I think I heard once someone say that, the first 100 clients is always the hardest and the next 100 is pretty easy, but, I'm certain that's all relative. And interestingly enough, we're coming up on our 100th client. I think we're probably 2 or 3 away at this point.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, I'll have to do a little celebration.
I mean, how many clients did y'all have when you joined Karen initially?
It was in the mid 30s. I think it was like 35 or 36. So we've just about tripled our client base, and we've done a couple fee increases at that point. So not only have we grown in terms of number of clients, but our revenues have grown even significantly more than that.
Oh, that's so awesome. Okay, so I can dig into so many different pieces of this because it's so interesting to me.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting when we get into more of the retainer discussion. I'll talk about kind of how that fee structure has evolved, because I think it'll tie right into that conversation more clearly.
Agreed. I think what excites me about this, and I know you hear this a lot, or I'm just assuming you do, is that this is how the succession planning process is supposed to work. And it's supposed to be an advisor that ultimately wants their clients left in good hands. And I think most importantly, probably they financially prepared themselves that they don't have to get maximum equity value out of their firm from day one, and they don't have to sell their firm for $5 million to be able to afford retirement. So, I remember you had mentioned in the last podcast that Karen did her own financial planning and kind of took care of her own finances so that she was able to structure something that actually worked instead of, because when you were started buying in at like 24, 25 years old, you can't just stroke her a check for several $1 million, but you can, structure something like this over time. And so this is the way it's supposed to be done, where the clients are taken care of. The firm kind of got handed down the line, but Karen got value out of having built the firm, and she got equity having, I'm assuming even more value for having brought you in and grown, tripled the firm, and, even more so in terms of revenue. So the value of the firm has probably gone 4 or 5 times up. So I don't know. This is just the way it's supposed to work. And I don't know why it's so rare to see. I joke that XYPN grows so fast because of the pissed off junior planners, because there's a lot of Jake Kueblers out there that are in that position that get screwed over on the deal. And so then they just go launch their own firm. And we have a lot of those in the network. So, but it's unfortunate because I think that there's so much opportunity to do what y'all have done. It's just a challenge, I guess. And I guess it looks easy, but it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, certainly I would credit a lot of the success to the factor that you mentioned, being that, Karen did not go into this transaction as let's maximize my economic value out of this. Although when you talk to her, and she'll kind of freely say this when she talks about the succession plan, she greatly benefited from the growth of the firm. And so she feels like her financial reward was growing the business alongside me and realizing the profits that probably wouldn't otherwise have happened had she had stayed a solo planner kind of in this lifestyle practice phase. So certainly the financial side was one piece that kind of made things run smoothly. But then even more than that, certainly we just worked well together in the partnership. But most importantly, she never had this mentality of, this is my firm, I need to retain control. The vision needs to stay in line with my, what I want to get out of this firm. She, from the very beginning, recognized that in order for me to be interested in being a part of this partnership and then ultimately buying it out from her, that the vision of the firm was going to have to shift towards what I found important. And she was always willing to go along with the direction that I wanted to take the firm, which was really kind of building into this multi-advisor or enterprise partnership, as opposed to kind of keeping it small and solo, which there's nothing wrong with. It's just, for me, that wasn't my long-term vision. And so for me to be interested in coming in and growing something and being a part of something, it had to be moving in the direction of where I wanted it to be ultimately.
I remember when I was looking for a job before I ultimately went solo, I had a guy offer me that said, come in, I'll integrate you into the firm. We'll double the size of the firm, and then we'll have enough profits off of that, having doubled the size of the firm, for you to buy me out. I was like, wait, you want me to come in, double the size of your firm, and then buy it from you? How about you give me 50% equity on an owner's note? I'll buy it from you, but I'll buy half your firm and then we'll double it. And then I'll buy out your other half. And he was like, that's not how it's done. And now I see, well, that is how it worked at your firm. And it actually worked out really well because it gave you the incentive to grow it. And Karen benefited from the fact that y'all have significantly grown since she was there because you had the incentive to grow it. Otherwise, you have this incentive to not grow and then to try to buy it at a lower price and then grow it. So I think advisors never really sit down and think through, like, if you were working with a client that wanted to buy a business and they presented the deal that a lot of younger advisors are offered, they would never recommend that they take that deal. So I guess it's just the way it's always been done. So, all right, enough of my ranting. So you were 50%, or you owned 50% of the stock and of the shares. So have you purchased the remaining shares and you are sole shareholder, or will Karen maintain equity long term?
I'm very close to being sole owner. So the way that we ended up structuring the deal, and really this was Karen's idea, was I purchased the original 50% on a 5-year note in 2011. And then Karen went ahead and just gave me an option to purchase the remaining shares at the end of that 5-year time frame. And her option said, as long as she continues to work in the business, she can spread that option out over 5 years. So I could buy 10% a year starting in 2016. Or if she retires, then I can go ahead and purchase her remaining shares. And so she retired as of September 1st. And so my option is that I can go ahead and purchase out her remaining shares. However, we did some planning with our CPA over the summer and came to the realization that ultimately, when I buy her out, the partnership ends. So right now we file, we're an LLC, we file as a partnership, so we do the 1065. If we were to facilitate the buyout right now, it would create a short tax year, and then I'd have a new entity that starts as of the date of the buyout through December 31st. So it just kind of became a mess from the tax situation. So what we decided to do is come up with a formula to divide profits for this year and then facilitate the actual buyout as of December 31st, which also works out really well with our client contracts because all of our client contracts run on an annual basis. And so we'll be renewing our client contracts as of January 1. So we can just put into that as part of their renewal, they understand that the ownership has changed. I don't know kind of what it works from state to state, but at least in Illinois, our client agreements say that there's a non-assignment clause in there, and the state of Illinois says majority share change of the firm is considered an assignment. So they want us to also have our clients have the opportunity to give a consent on that, even if it's a negative consent that says, as long as we send out a notice that says you understand this is changing, if you take no action, you're consenting. I guess the state auditor is fine with that, but we do need to let clients know that there's a change happening.
I'm curious with your custodian, because y'all do manage investments. So from a custodial standpoint, if the entity is changing, like the literal business entity will shift, does that mean you have to repaper every client at the custodian and every client contract and every ADV? I mean, does everything change, or can you shift without having to go through all that?
So we still have the LLC in place. So the entity itself is still going to remain. It's just the person that owns the shares of the entity has changed. So over the last year and a half, every time we've done an insurance renewal for our E&O insurance and so forth, to even talking to the custodian, we've been letting them know, hey, this is coming in the pipeline. Do we need to do anything? And so far, no one said, oh, yeah, that's going to create a problem. So from the custodial standpoint, it'll still be the same firm. We'll still have the same LPOAs. It's just the sort of authorized person to act on behalf of the entity. That may change over time, but otherwise there's not much change on that behalf.
Because I guess the entity is not actually changing, just the taxation of the entity.
Right.
Is changing. Okay. And then I guess you'll have the option if you want to go, S Corp or C Corp, or stay, sole proprietor once you own 100% of the shares.
Right. Well, and again, this gets a little bit beyond my area of expertise, getting into business tax, which is, of course, why we have a CPA. My understanding is if I stay as a sole prop with the LLC, I can keep the tax ID number of the partnership. However, if I elected an S corp, then I have to get a new tax ID number, which then creates a whole host of new problems, such as, the 401k has to be redone, all these other, trickle down effects. So I'm just like, okay, we're going to keep it simple for now. And then when I bring on new partners in the future, I will figure out at that point if it makes sense to elect S corp. But, we have an election coming up. Who knows what tax code's going to be in the future. So it doesn't seem to make sense to make a whole lot of tax elections right now until we have more certainty about the future.
That's fair. They keep trying to blow up the S corp tax benefits of the owner being able to take dividends anyway. So if that goes away, none of us will be tempted to go S corp, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, I think it's hard for an advisor to opt into S corp and really see much savings anyway. I mean, you look at any advisor compensation study and they're clearly, average salary of any firm owner should be well above the Social Security wage base, which means S corp shouldn't have much tax benefit if you're paying yourself a proper wage.
Yeah, I think that's we don't have to dig into that too much, but if you're paying yourself, if you're the only employee, you're a solo and you pay yourself a wage and then you give yourself a dividend, you are probably wrong, and talk to a CPA.
Right.
So we can leave it at that, because setting a fair wage is, you can't just set it at $50,000 and move on. It doesn't work that way. So anyway, okay, so you are going to be taking on, so you're going to be 100% owner. What is the plan from there? Because you've expressed, since I have known you, you have been saying, I don't want to be in this alone. I want to have other advisors. We want to be doing some other stuff. So is equity going to become part of a compensation package? Is it going to be buy-in opportunity? What do you see as the ideal going forward for how equity gets given out? And do you plan on maintaining a certain percentage for yourself? What's your plan there?
Yeah, all that's still to be decided. I certainly have made it very clear to Josh and Emily that equity is on the table for the future, but the primary goal was getting through the initial succession plan and then determining the next succession plan or partnership options are all things that eventually need to be worked out. Right now, our focus is coming up with a new advisor compensation plan. At this point, our advisors are 100% salaried, and they'll continue to have a salary, but we also want to put some stronger incentives so that they have some skin in the game as the firm grows and can both participate in and realize some income growth as the firm grows.
Yeah, I remember telling my last boss that I had wanted equity. And I remember he asked me, he said, why do you want equity in the firm? And I was like, well, it's a good question. I want to be able to help make decisions. He's like, well, what if I let you help make decisions? I want to be able to benefit from the growth. It's like, well, what if I give you a revenue-based, compensation package? And I remember being kind of stumped. I'm like, why do I want equity here again if he's willing to give me all the things that come with equity? Ultimately, what I realized was I didn't want to have to answer anybody else, which wasn't going to happen with with a minority ownership interest. But it is an interesting thing that we tend in financial planning, we just have this structure for the way it's supposed to be done. So you're supposed to start giving away 5 and 10% chunks to your lead advisors as they prove themselves and all that. But I just wonder, do people even really want it? Would they rather have a revenue-based bonus structure or something else? And I don't know. I'm just talking out loud, or thinking out loud, I guess. But I don't know. I think the just doing it for the sake of doing it isn't necessarily right. And I would be interested to know kind of what the ideal is for the younger advisors out there that aren't interested in starting a firm. They want to work for an established practice and help grow it. Is equity really the best thing for them, or is there something else that they would rather have going forward?
Yeah, certainly. I've talked to advisors at conferences, and these are young advisors, and they say, well, I'm pretty happy with my compensation today, and so I don't really see all that much benefit in becoming an owner. It's just more responsibility. So I'm very conscious of, trying to, as I develop this plan, which is certainly still a work in progress, you want to have enough incentive that there is financial and non-financial rewards for being an equity partner, but also have some salary or other bonus structures to incentivize those who maybe ownership isn't right for whatever reason.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just going to make up a number. I don't know what the revenue of your firm is. Let's say it's $1 million, so it's worth $2 million on a 2 times gross revenue multiplier. Owning 10% of that, it's I have $200,000. But when your advisors are in their 20s, that's the bulk of their net worth and probably the biggest debt that they have, including a mortgage since you're in Champaign. And yet they don't actually have any control because they only own 10%. I mean, it's a minority stake holding. So I don't know. It's, again, I know it's the way it's always done. I don't have an answer for, the better way to do it. It's just kind of an interesting model that I do wonder if it's really ideal or if it's just been kind of hacked into that and there's a better way.
Yeah, well, in typical podcast fashion, I certainly hear another topic for discussion on a future episode.
No kidding. And I'll be interested to hear in January. We could probably have you back on to let us know what happened that you didn't anticipate, because I'm assuming something will come up with a custodian or compliance officer or something. Somebody will go, hey, no, wait a minute. But there's just so few resources out there. And so now remind me, did you work with anybody? I mean, I know there are a few companies out there that help with this, but very, very few. So have you worked with anybody, or are y'all really just pulling this together all by yourself?
Way back when, we used a succession planning consultant, David Goad, he was actually hired by the Alliance of Comprehensive Planners to provide a bunch of information to that network. And we pulled a lot of the data he had provided to help us create the original succession plan. We didn't ultimately hire him for our firm individually. We were actually too small. He wouldn't talk to us on an individual firm level. And then we did engage a business coach, Diane McPhee, who we've now been with for, probably 5 or 6 years, probably at least 6, actually. So she's kind of been behind the scenes to provide some guidance and some coaching, which has been really helpful. But other than that, no, really, we haven't engaged anybody like FP Transitions or so on. It's been kind of things that we've done on our own, talking to other advisors, pulling resources as we can find them, and so on.
All right. Well, I see a future business for you, so to distract you from your core business, and that's just helping people understand the other ways you can do succession planning. So, and Diane McPhee, I've heard her speak before. She is fantastic. Do you know her website off the top of your head so we can give that to listeners?
I don't know it off the top of my head. Her last name is MacPhee, so I'm sure if you Google it, you can find it. Yeah.
All right. We'll put it in the show notes. We'll look it up. So. Okay, so switching gears just a little bit, and you mentioned Alliance of Comprehensive Planners, which I believe we talked about this in our first episode, but ACP, formerly ACA, the Alliance of Cambridge Advisors, which was started by Burt Whitehead back in the early 90s. ACA became a not good acronym to have after the Affordable Care Act, so I think there was a rebranding, in addition to Alliance of Comprehensive Planners, just I think speaks the brand a little bit better, is I would say a predecessor to XY Planning Network, kind of a similar model in terms of helping advisors that want to start and run practices. So it's a membership association. So similar in structure. So just for context for folks. And so this is an organization that did Karen actually start her firm when it was ACA, now ACP, or did she join later?
She did. So ACP, formerly, it's gone through several iterations. The Cambridge in the original name was just based on the street name of, I can't remember if it was Bert's office or home address, but there's a lot of Cambridges in the financial services industry. So Cambridge got confusing. So then the acronym kind of became the branding. And then, of course, right with the Affordable Care Act, that kind of went kaput as well. But yes, so Karen started the firm with the help of Bert, I believe, kind of shortly after he moved it out of, working, literally training advisors in his home to kind of a more formalized business structure that ultimately, as Bert said, I'm a financial advisor at heart. I'm not a association leader. He ended up selling the intellectual property of the organization and to the board, and the board created this not-for-profit entity that is ACP today. So yeah, Karen's been a member since, I believe, 99 when she started her firm, and she continues to be involved to today. In fact, she every year goes to train the newer advisors on, everything from how to start your practice to how to sit across from a client and tell them their fee is however many thousands of dollars and convince them to actually write a check.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into the ACP model, which you recently co-authored a white paper, which I want to dig into, but I think it helps to kind of set the stage of what ACP is to know why you even bothered taking the time to write this paper. So what, in your mind, makes ACP different from, we'll say, just kind of traditional financial planning as a whole, which, as we know, is, either commission or AUM centric?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm actually on the board of directors, about to finish out my last year, and we've done some looking at kind of what is our core message, actually partly based on your prodding, Alan, at least for me personally. But really, I would say that the ACP, what differentiates it from all the other organizations out there is we're the retainer kind of advisors that take a tax-focused approach to our planning process. And to give you some context behind that, Burt Whitehead, the original founder of the organization, he was a tax attorney who, when he was working with his clients, just realized, hey, they need more than just tax advice here, and sort of started branching out into more areas than just tax planning. So he's kind of one of those guys, you talk from NAFA or whatever, who are like, there wasn't a model out there for us. So he literally had to create it. So kind of what differentiated him from the traditional birth of the fee-only world is a lot of the people in the fee-only world were coming from the investment side. And so their focus was really around kind of investment management plus financial planning. His focus was always around tax planning plus everything else. And the interesting thing about that is, especially when you're working with kind of what I would call middle America, which are, the people who become wealthy by their own work, the sort of the kind of millionaire next door types, is you can add a ton of value on the tax side. I mean, as all of us know, our taxes are one of our biggest expenses. And if you're not diligent about it, you certainly can end up overpaying. And it's one of those areas that, kind of weaves in and out of every part of the financial plan. So Burt, kind of the way that the organization even began was he was just giving a talk at a NAFA conference about this model that he had developed for working with middle-class Americans who didn't have portfolios to manage, and advisors were coming up to him after his talk saying, hey, I want to do this the way that you do it. Can you teach me how to do it? And so he literally said, okay, write me a check, and had people come to his home, and in his living room, he kind of went through, here's my model, here's how I do it. And from there, the organization was kind of born and created. So in terms of where the organization is today, it's kind of, like you said, it's similar to XY, just kind of a different flavor on the way that the planning approach is taken, where a lot of the members in ACP, so when I say tax focused, that is one of the core areas of planning for us. For every new client that our firm works with, tax planning is usually the place that we start with, so that we really understand their tax situation and can plan around it. And it's one of those areas that I would say, advisors talk about alpha in the portfolio and so on, but certainly in our firm, taxes is one of those areas that every year we can show our clients, here's the hard dollar savings that we found for you through tax planning.
Yeah, there's huge tax alpha for folks that know taxes and really understand it and can do planning and projections, because you actually do tax preparation, which I believe most people or most advisors in ACP actually do tax prep in addition to tax planning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but I want to say it's somewhere in like the 85 to 90% of advisors within ACP actually do the tax preparation for clients. And within our firm, that means that there are certainly clients whose tax situations are really in the need of a CPA. And so maybe like 10% of our clients do use a CPA for tax prep. But for most clients, with a simple 1040, maybe a Schedule C, maybe a rental property too, the tax return isn't that complicated, where if you're really diving in and doing some deep tax planning, adding the tax return prep on top of that is not that much extra work. And the value that you add to the client, I don't know what it is, but clients hate to find tax preparers. They hate changing tax preparers, and just having someone that knows their entire financial situation and knows which documents to ask for, because it's like, hey, remember when we refinanced your mortgage and maybe we need to get this statement from closing or whatever in order to really make sure we've got all the details for your tax return. It's a huge value add to our clients.
And I think that was always my issue with working with CPAs, was that CPAs were always rearward looking to me. It is really challenging to find forward looking CPAs that run really detailed tax projections. So we were always at the end of the year looking back at like, okay, well, this is what happened this past year. And there was always this communication of like trying to get them all the information, not knowing what all they need and that sort of thing. And then, we're trying to run projections while they're looking at, previous stuff. And it was always a strange, it was always a strange relationship. So I do think that there's huge opportunity whenever you're doing the actual planning, the projections, which is probably, again, the core part anyway, to actually prepare and save your clients a ton of money, because you're kind of structuring everything out and everything about the client situation. And there's no better way to get to know a client than look at their tax return. So So ACP, so you mentioned that retainer fees, which I think, Bert was one of the first that dipped into this retainer model and moving away from just strict assets under management, which obviously we're huge fans of, moving to a subscription. We call it subscription when we're client facing, but kind of monthly retainer model. But how do you charge? And I guess you also mentioned that there has been a bit of a transition where client fees are going up. So I guess what has been the core change of the fee structure at Bluestem?
Yeah, well, to sort of back up in terms of ACP and sort of core philosophy of the organization, I think it probably first helps to define what a retainer is, because I think even from firm to firm, what a retainer means can really vary pretty greatly. So like I said, Bert's clients really were kind of your middle class, regular Americans and didn't have assets to manage. So when he developed his retainer, he was really looking at developing a fee structure that was based on his client's total financial situation and how much complexity was there going to be in creating and developing the financial plan and working together, as well as how much value could he add for the client when he was working with them. So the fee calculation that he came up with was a retainer that isn't sort of the flat monthly retainer, which I know XY is a big fan of. It's a little different. It's actually an income and net worth based calculation. And, instead of kind of going where every client's based basically on the same fee structure, the fee structure is really designed to be tailored to each client situation. So the primary factors into the fee calculation, of course, are income, and even the types of income that are calculated into the fee structure can be different. So the way that wage income is included is different than business income, which is different than retirement income, because each of those has different tax planning opportunities as well as just different complexity. Certainly, business owners and owners of real estate are going to have a lot more opportunity, but as well as tax complexity. So that's going to vary based on how the fee is calculated. And then, of course, the other big part of the fee structure is the net worth. And when I say net worth, I really mean kind of total marketable assets. So that's everything that the client owns, including the real estate and so forth. And the idea behind that is, if we're going to really advise on our client's total financial picture, we need to include their total picture in their net worth. So, if I'm working with a business owner or someone that owns rental property, or even someone who just, they're going to keep their assets at their old broker because, dad's worked with this guy for 30 years and, they just can't quite cut the cord. Well, whether or not I'm managing the money or not, I have to include it in your planning situation, and I need to think about how it affects your tax return, and I need to factor it into all of our different projections. And so therefore it adds complexity, and it's going to be included whether or not it's custody with me or elsewhere.
So some listeners will know from my story back in episode 50 that I actually ran a net worth income based retainer as well. We had Andrew Severston on from the Planning Center, and he kind of talked about a similar model in terms of net worth plus income. I'm a huge fan of this model because when we sit down and we look at all the conflicts of interest that exist in AUM, the big one has always been mortgages. It's like, well, if you advise a client to pay off their mortgage instead of saving money, your fees, don't go up because it's not in their assets that you're managing. And by focusing on net worth, it does eliminate a lot of these conflicts. But, obviously the fee is not quite as, it's not quite as simple, right? 1% AUM, it's easy to say, it's easy to calculate. So could you talk about just a little bit about the process of figuring out all these fees and how often you recalculate? And finally, how in the world do you explain this to a client so that they understand and get just so they have a full understanding of how they're being charged?
Mm-hmm. The truth of the matter is most clients don't really care how you calculate the fee. They only really care what the fee is. And as long as you can show them that there's enough value to justify the fee, we don't usually show them the mechanics of the fee structure itself. So maybe just as some history. So when Karen started working for ACP, she used the fee calculator at the beginning, but she tried to simplify it and ultimately simplified it down to more of a tiered structure. And so kind of when I joined her, there was 2 fees for our clients. And it was basically a sort of a financial planning fee and a wealth management fee. And basically clients were put into one of these two fees, and those truly were a flat fee. So she had tried to pare down and simplify it because I think she felt like the ACP based fee method was just a little bit too complicated, and she would prefer to have just a flat ongoing fee for all the clients based on the complexity of their situation. When I started working for her, it became pretty obvious that under a system with only two tiers, that it really didn't capture the fact that our client situations varied. And so we ended up expanding from 2 to 6 level fees. So we still had financial planning and wealth. I think we called it wealth mentoring. And then under those, we had 3 distinct fees under financial planning and 3 under wealth mentoring. And then we kind of tried to define those categories based on the client's income and net worth. So if your income and net worth were this, you might generally be in level 2 of financial planning. And if your income was higher or your net worth was higher, maybe you were in level 1 of wealth mentoring. So we tried to simplify it and make it easier for the clients to understand. We ended up figuring out that even under this kind of tiered system, it presented other challenges that you may not think of as you try to simplify the fee down. One of the problems that we quickly ran across was that if your lowest fee is, let's say, $2,000 or $3,000 a year, and your highest tier fee is $16,000 a year, and you have clients that are in an accumulation phase, their situation is going to evolve. And I think we see this with our clients where their net worth changes 10 or 20% a year, and it's like year to year it doesn't seem like that much, but then over 5 years you compound all the changes that have happened, not only on the net worth side, but job changes, situational changes, inheritances, and so forth. And their complexity can change pretty rapidly. And so you have to promote clients or graduate them up through your tier system. And the problem with that, at least from our end, is we're kind of too nice. So when you have qualitative metrics measuring their level, we kind of give our clients the benefit of the doubt and not graduate them when we needed to. So we ended up undercharging them. And then the other problem is when you do graduate them, you're kind of stair-stepping their fee where they go from, $2,000 to $3,000 or $3,000 to $5,000. And, those are pretty big jumps. And even though the client situation may have really changed in 3 years, because those first 2 years you only charged them, let's say $3,000, and now you're asking for $5,000. They're just looking at that saying, hey, that's like a 70% increase in my fees. And my situation didn't change that much over the past year.
And your service model's not really changing. Like, you're still doing comprehensive planning. You can't point to it and say like, oh, but now we're going to do your tax preparation. Like, you're already doing all of it. So it's more of a, hey, we're adding more value, but no tangible service offering.
So as we reevaluated our tiered structure and figured out it just wasn't working for us, there wasn't enough nuance in the level or in the tiers, as well as we were just bad about reevaluating our client situations and promoting them properly through the fee system. We had to go back to all of our clients and say, we are implementing a new fee structure. We're going back to the income and net worth basis, and have a conversation with them about, here's what our fee structure is going to look like going forward. We certainly had some clients who were already priced pretty appropriately, so their fee structure didn't change all that much. It was just the way the fee was calculated was changing. But other clients, we definitely had to go back and raise their fees. And I think on average, it was a fee increase of about 50%. And so for some clients, it would be your fee was staying the same. And for other clients, it would be your fees doubling. And I think at that time, so we had I think 75 or 80 clients at that time. And we only lost one client throughout the fee increase.
No way. That's incredible.
Yeah. So, partly it's just we were way undercharging, and some of our clients knew it. We had several that said, oh, we completely understand. Some even said, hey, we knew we were getting a good deal. There was others who, they weren't happy about it, but they also understood that the value that we added for them was tremendous. It was certainly a learning experience on our end, having all those conversations. It really made me hone my skills in describing the value that we add to our clients.
That's incredible. I know a lot of advisors that don't want to have a conversation about raising fees, 3 or 5%, much less doubling. And I will add just kind of one caveat, and that is that we actually have quite a few advisors that charge a net worth income based fee and they kind of calculate it for the year and just bill it monthly instead of quarterly against investment accounts or a brokerage account or something like that, or actually having them write a check. Just kind of depends, because I am such a huge fan of this model, especially for accumulators, because I think it makes more sense when you have someone who is high income, high debt. AUM obviously won't work. I mean, I've had clients that they wouldn't have assets for 5 or 10 years because, I mean, I had a doctor couple one time and they had $1 million in student loan debt between the two of them. And telling them, sorry, I can't work with you because basically I can't make any money is just absurd, because they made like $700,000 between the two of them. Just AUM doesn't work. And that's the whole thing about retainers. And I guess part of the reason why you wrote the white paper. So just give us kind of a rundown on the white paper and kind of your rationale for writing, and we'll link to it in the show notes, but just kind of writing this paper focused on retainers and kind of history of retainers and all of that, kind of everything we're talking about today.
Yeah, so in fall of 2015, actually I think it was spring of 2015, I sat on a panel at a NAFA conference with Bob Veeries, Carolyn McClanahan, Roy Dilberto, and there's another guy on the panel that I'm completely blanking on the name. I apologize. But anyway, it was all focused on, where are fee structures for advisors moving in the future? So kind of, if we're going to move off of AUM, what's the future of the industry look like? And it was let's say, controversial session. We had a lot of people at the end who, during the Q&A had good feedback, but there was a lot of people who were either kind of didn't understand what the retainer model was, or they, were trying to poke holes in it, or I just felt like there was a lot of misunderstanding. And also at the same time, the DOL was working on releasing their rules for the new fiduciary standards. And it just, we're looking across the industry saying, wow, there's certainly some changes coming, and retainers, in our opinion, of course, we may have a little bit of bias, but we feel like it really is a great answer for clients, because unlike hourly, where you're really kind of a time focused and it's hard to produce some of the same margins, and there's all sorts of problems with hourly. A retainer really is designed to be a value-based system, which I think at its core, really that's what AUM is about too. It's just the value tends on being focused on the value of the client's portfolio, and sort of working backwards to the complexity of the situation based on portfolio size. The retainer's essentially trying to do the same thing, but just work backwards from the client's total financial picture, not just portfolio size. So we were looking at all these different factors and saying there's a lot of misinformation or just lack of understanding out there, and we'd really like to have some way to promote the message of maybe taking another look at retainers is worth it if you're getting frustrated by AUM or hourly or whatever model you're working on that's just not working for you. So Ken Robinson, who's another ACP planner, and I kind of started kicking the idea back and forth and thought that it would be kind of fun to write up a paper to express our viewpoints on it. So by late fall of 2015, we started the conversation, and then in early 2016, we actually started working on the development of the paper. So the paper, turns out white papers are a lot of work, as I'm sure you're well aware of, but your listeners may not be. It took us a long time to both write it and edit it and figure out how we were going to distribute it. But what we ended up doing is, with the support of ACP, Ken and I wrote it, but then relied on other ACP members as well as some of the staff at ACP to do some of the editing and really polish it up and make it look like something presentable. And then just because I've been a member of ACP, I'm on the board, we ended up deciding, this would be a great way to sort of reinsert ACP back into the conversation about the future of fee structures. And so, ACP is now a sponsor of the white paper. So in order to download the paper, you'll have to go and get it through ACP's website. But just know that, it's not a marketing piece for ACP. We really did focus on kind of what do we see the retainer model? What does it mean to have a retainer fee structure? What are the advantages? We also touch on the disadvantages. I think that's worth noting that there is not a perfect fee structure. You can present me with any model that you use and I can find problems with it, whether it's from the business perspective or conflicts of interest with the client. I don't think there's a perfect model, but I think the retainer does a good job of reducing the conflicts of interest while still maintaining some of the positives that you get under AUM, including, that value structure, the profitability, all those sorts of things. I think the retainer has those advantages built in.
I totally agree. I think that, we know AUM is high margin, high profitability, assuming you're working with clients that have $500,000 or more in investable assets that you can actually manage and they want you to manage. But that's, 5 to 10% of the population. So how are we going to reach the others? Well, we have these retainer models, which, we use the word retainer. And I think it's important to note that we use the word retainer differently than like my attorney uses the word retainer, right? Like he has a retainer account that I deposit money into quarterly and we use it up on an hourly basis. So, and I do wonder if we need to change the conversation away from the word retainer and more towards subscription, which basically is just saying we're charging you just on a regular basis a certain fee, and it's just calculated different from AUM. That's really all it is. I think that sometimes I get caught up on the language and trying to explain the different pieces. But, to your point, there are weaknesses in every business model. Tell me your ideal client, tell me your perfect client profile, and then we can design a fee structure that's ideal for them. And it could be AUM based. It could be only net worth based. It could be only income based. I don't know. There are so many ways that you can go about it. It may be project based. It may be flat fee, hourly. I don't know.
Right. And not only do you have to take into account your ideal client today, but factor in if you're working with a 30-year-old couple, their situation in 10 years is going to be completely different than where it's at today. So you want to try to build a fee structure that works for them today, but also evolves as their situation evolves. And that's a tough thing to do. So where we're at today, I can't even promise that our own firm's fee structure wouldn't change again in the future. I'm hoping that it's flexible enough that it'll grow with our client basis, but you don't know what you don't know, and it may change in the future.
And where the market goes and what the Department of Labor does. And everything,
right.
Everything kind of plays into it. I will say retainers are very, very well positioned given DOL, rulings and all of that. But, you make a good point about your firm, because here you are the oldest advisor of 3 advisors. You're 30. You purchased a firm that probably had an older client base, but I suspect now you're attracting younger clients. While we do try to make it simple and saying like, have a niche market, have a really focused firm that you can design everything around it, sometimes you're in a position where that's just not possible, because here you have an older client base that you purchased and you're bringing in clients that look more like you from an age perspective. And it does get complex, and trying to design something that works today and will work in 10 years sounds kind of like a mess. But, I think it's important to be able to pivot and be able to say, as you've already done once before, we were wrong. The fee structure is not working anymore, so let's make a shift. And apparently you can keep clients while doubling their fees at times, so which is pretty amazing.
Right. And to back up, to your point about is the word retainer right or not right? We talk a little bit about this in the paper itself. There's not even really consistency around how a retainer is used in attorneys. The model that you talked about where you bill on an hourly basis against the retainer, that's one model, but there are certainly attorneys who have retainers that look more like ours. And so the way that I describe it to a client is I just tell them, listen, here's how much we're going to charge you for working together over the next year. And over that year, we're going to meet so many times, and during those meetings, we're going to accomplish X, Y, and Z. However, in addition to those things that we're going to do for you, we recognize the fact that financial planning does not happen on a regular schedule, right? You can't anticipate when that job offer is going to come, or when you lose your job, or you're looking to build your dream house, or you get pregnant, and things change, right? And part of what you're paying for is to have that access to us whenever you need us. And we promise that we'll be here and we'll be available to discuss whatever your needs are at that time. And so there's actually a really great book that was written by a consultant, and I can actually find it for you here in a second. But it's all about kind of the fact that a retainer is really based on, it's a value-based fee system. And I think that's one of the important things is you're not telling the client, listen, our fees are based on quantitative method only. You are building in the fact that you're adding value on their total situation, and that, the focus isn't really meant to be on only your income or only your net worth or only your portfolio or only your business. The fact is that as comprehensive planners, we're here to look at your total situation. And, to your point about, do you charge monthly or quarterly or annually? I think really that's just ultimately what works best for your business. For us, monthly billing just takes more work, because then every month you have to send out an invoice and track down the clients who don't pay. And, we don't take credit cards, but that's only because I refuse to pay the 2 or 3% service charge. But, the point is, that it doesn't really matter kind of how you actually divide up and have your clients pay the retainer. This is our fee for working together for the next year. And that's kind of the gist of it.
And there are some states that are really pushing us on this. I mean, I know Utah was one. I believe Colorado, California maybe has even asked, as we've gone through the compliance process, where they say, okay, what are you doing for the client on a monthly basis? And so the way we describe it is, hey, we're not necessarily doing something every month for the $150 a month they're paying us. What we do is we do this on an annual basis here, all the things we do throughout the year, and we charge $1,800 a year for it. We just let our clients pay us monthly and pay us $150 a month instead of $1,800 for the year. Because I think sometimes we get caught up on, I charge quarterly, so I have to meet with my clients quarterly, or charge monthly, I have to email them monthly. And I don't think that's necessary. I think it's more, we can talk about it on a year-by-year basis of, hey, this is what we do. I guess this is the standard. We do this for all of our clients. And then here, we could even make another list of here are the other things that come up throughout the year that, that we help with. So no, we're not helping every client every year buy a new house, but that's going to come up. And so these are areas where we can address. And if you really start to look at all the client situations that we help with, that is a very, very, very long list. It's not just meeting a couple times a year and reviewing their portfolio. So especially younger clients, I mean, we do so much with them every single year. Life happens so fast when you're in your 30s and 40s. But what I think would be interesting, maybe I'll be your prospective client one of these days, but is to sit down and hear your sales pitch, because it's got to be really, really good to explain price based on value, which we did Kitsis and I did an episode on this recently. It's very easy to say this is $200 an hour or 1% of AUM. It's another thing to be able to describe the tangible but almost intangible, that qualitative, in addition to the quantitative value of planning and how you're going to charge and why. I think that is a honed skill set that a lot of advisors are scared of spending the time to really work on, because it is tough. But once you get it, I think it's worthwhile. So I would encourage listeners, especially if you're looking at, shifting into the retainer model or just want to learn more, we'll have a link to the white paper in the show notes. And we will also link to our recently launched book on monthly retainers, which we don't so much dive into the history of retainers, but more just on how to actually run a monthly model. So I would say probably reading both will get you up to speed as quickly as possible on kind of what's out there. And I'll be interested to hear feedback on both of the write-ups, just to know kind of what are folks looking for going forward. There's probably much more writing to be done. I'm not sure if you'll have the energy to do it after you've seen just how hard it is, especially when you're not, charging for it or monetizing it in some way. It's hard to put together free white papers too often, but there's probably a lot of content that we can look at providing just to kind of explain, I guess, level 2 after folks get through kind of the content that's been written. So we'll link to both of those on the show notes. Jake, thank you again so much for taking the time to be on again and kind of talk through your last year. It sounds exciting. We may just have to make this an annual thing to check in once a year to see how things are going, because it's just kind of fun to see what a successful firm looks like. Again, owned by a 30-year-old with a bunch of 20-year-olds at the firm. I love it. It's so exciting to hear about. I'm so glad it worked out to have Jake back on the show 1 year later, because it shows just how much can happen in a year. I mean, they completed the succession planning process. His partner retired. They lost a lead planner, hired a new support advisor, and overhauled their fee structure. Not a bad 12 months. So for all the younger planners out there looking for a model for the right way to buy a practice and transition, I think Jake's story is it. And if you find yourself stuck in a situation where the owner doesn't want to sell any equity or put any of their handshake promises in a contract, I recommend you move on until you find someone who's more serious about the process. Be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with myself and Kitsis, and to finally find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.